All right, thank you so much for coming. Jennifer Franklin is running, she said about 10 minutes late, so she should be here in about another 5. I'm going to go ahead and introduce her and introduce Iain, and then Ian's going to start reading, and hopefully she will get here in the meantime. Right? We're crossing our fingers. So Iain Haley Pollock is the author of 3 poetry collections, Spit Back a Boy, Ghost Like a Place, and All the Possible Bodies. He has published individual poems in American Poetry Review, the Kenyon Review, the New York Times Magazine, and the Progressive. Pollock's work has received several honors, including the Cave Canem Prize, the Alice Faye de Castagnola Award from the Poetry Society of America. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Excellent. An NYSCA/NYFA Artist Fellowship in Poetry, the Bim Ramke Prize for Poetry, and a nomination for an NAACP Image Award. He serves as director of the MFA program in creative writing at Manhattanville University in Purchase, New York. And Jennifer is the author of 3 poetry collections, including If Some God Shakes Your House, a finalist for the Peterson Prize and Julie Suck Award. Her work has been commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art and has also been published in the Paris Review, The Nation, the Bedford Guide to Literature, and Poetry Society of America's Poetry in Motion. She won a Pushcart Prize, the 2024 John Tribble Editing Fellowship, an NYFA/City Arts Corps grant, and a Café Royal Cultural Foundation Award in Literature. She was interviewed in the forthcoming documentary, Poetry is Not a Luxury, along with poets Jane Hirschfeld, Joy Harjo, and Ree Howe. She is co-founder and co-host of Words Like Blades, an online reading series that amplifies new work by marginalized emerging writers and their mentors, and co-editor of the anthology Braving the Body. She teaches in Iain's Manhattanville MFA program at Poets House, the Frost Place, Provincetown's Fine Arts Work Center online, and her own manuscript revision workshops. Please welcome them. So each poet's going to read for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to ask them questions for 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to you for questions. So write down your questions as they're reading and as they're talking, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Iain?
Thank you, Laurel. So I will be reading until Jennifer arrives. I'll start with the first poem, and then we'll see how far we get. I'm teasing. So Laurel is an alum of the program I run, and so we have a monthly newsletter, and over my time running the program, I've seen her post in the newsletter about this reading. So when I had a book come out, I think it was actually one of the first readings I booked for the tour, because like the idea of being in conversation with another writer in a very public space like a library was really appealing to me. It seems like you have a really good thing going here. You bring in wonderful folks. So I'm excited that I'm finally here. The Merritt Parkway was gentle with me. It sounds like it's not being gentle with Jennifer. So the first poem is a poem in 3 parts. My mother factors into it. She was a professor at University of California, Irvine. Member of the audience just got back from Irvine, but finished her career at Hamilton College in upstate New York. And she was a professor of classics, of Latin and Greek. And the thing that you need to know about Hamilton is that it sits over the top of Clinton, New York, on a hill overlooking Clinton. And there's one bit of Philadelphia city history that is important to fully understanding the poem, I think. I mentioned in passing a incident from the 80s in Philadelphia where the police department dropped an incendiary device on a Black liberation group with whom they were in a standoff. And as happens when you drop basically a bomb on houses that are attached, like the entire city block burned down. A Black mother's child considers his lost dream of immortality. 1. What was she hoping I'd learn? What lessons when my mother, who taught Greek at the college on the hill, read their old stories to me? to be ready one night for hooded snakes to crawl into my cradle, to leave a trail of twine behind me as I walked the labyrinthian corridors of my country, not to raise the wrong sail whenever I came home to her, not to dive as the swan and plummet into a woman bathing in the seclusion of high reeds, not to be the shock and awe of white wings. For me, though, the truth in the myth was this: power transforms into life, and life forever. And when my mother was finished, all I wanted was to live as those changing but unchanging gods. 2. The white man who taught me Greek hated me. He thought I was lazy. I admit that I often slept through his morning class, often stumbled through his translations as a boar through deep, sudden snow. My mother cried when she left me in the parking lot of that place, cried harder than I'd seen since the week after her father died. I think she had learned that no black mother can save her children. Save them, as you have proven and are still proving, America, from your primitive, bullhorned violence. And so, more days than not, her son stood beside an aluminum keg, fermenting himself, pouring into his gullet a river not of forgetfulness, but of an urgent forgetting. Three. My mother wanted to learn Latin on her way to Greek, but the teachers had her pegged to cook and sew. Short but thick-set, the school's own former football hero, her father traded on his glory, the scars earned for it, on his hobbled knees, the slight slur of his speech, to demand a place for her in a room of primers and chalkboards. They thought she should scurry about the rooms of your house, America, picking up what you had dropped. But she overcame to stand at the front of a room, professor of language and myth. I told a version of this story to black children at a school in Philadelphia. When I came to the end, my mother teaching Greek at the college on the hill, they rose from their chairs and applauded her through the proxy of me. I think now I lied to them. Lied to them while standing in a room across town from where you firebombed a city block to save yourself. America, you have eaten your children to keep your place on the honeyed mountaintop. If you have not already, you will consume these children too. And still you will come with wild, ravenous hunger for more. And why do you keep doing what you do? And what will you do one day when instead of a child, you swallow a stone? Thank you. There's some members of the Manhattanville MFA community here, and we are a clap between every poem community currently. It gets a little lonely up here when you have like that high church silence in between poems. So as you can tell, I think one of the aspects of the, one of the threads of the book is myth, sort of cultural myths, myths we tell about ourselves, myths we tell about our country. And the title poem deals with, I guess, myth, yes, but also like wanting to control narrative. I think it's sometimes important to write poems in the moment that something happens. I often work on a 5, 10, 15, 20-year lag, like something will bubble up from the unconscious and then I'm off and running and writing about it. But sometimes things happen in our world and I feel called to keep a record of it as one person saw it, as one writer saw it in the moment that it happened. Because I think otherwise, right, narratives get twisted, historians come in later and tell their story of it. And I think with the subject of this poem, which is the murder of George Floyd, I think that's already starting to happen for me, that there's like a twisting of what that moment was, and what has become in the aftermath. All the possible bodies. My alcoholic grandfather couldn't hold his money and passed a bad check. Hampton, Virginia, after Brown versus Board, but before Selma's Bloody Sunday. after my grandmother died, but before he moved the family north, back to the town of his birth. My mother saw her father cuffed and dragged from the house. The next day, by some miracle she never understood, he came home. Had he looked at the officers wrong, acted wrong, spoken wrong, been too familiar, been a few inches taller, been deeper voiced or darker skinned, and for this, had he caught a knee that night to the neck and not returned, perhaps my mother, needing to stay home and raise Aunt Joan and Uncle Keith, wouldn't have skipped college. Had she skipped college, perhaps she would not have gone for a PhD. Had she not gone for a PhD, perhaps she would not have met my father. Had she not met my father, perhaps I would not be here. Perhaps the boys sleeping upstairs from me now would not be here. When you spend 8 minutes and 46 seconds with your knee on another man's neck, you block not just the passage of air into his body, but block air into all the possible bodies dependent on that man and his neck to breathe. 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 I was saying earlier tonight that I'm always very surprised by what poems other people like, and that they're often very different from the poems that, you know, like your poems are like your children. You don't really have favorites, but you do. Maybe I should say students. Maybe that's not true of children. They're not here. So, you know, I asked my partner Naomi if, you know, what poems I should read as I'm out reading from the book. And she chose a poem that I wouldn't have read. And I was actually surprised that she chose, because it's about like the desire to be great, to be a genius, and in doing so to like leave the family behind. But it centers on the myth of Robert Johnson, who was a 20th century, early 20th century blues musician. And the legend surrounding Johnson is that, you know, he was like a middling blues guitar player in the Delta of Mississippi, and then he disappeared for a number of months. But when he came back, he was the greatest guitar player of all time, right? He had improved his skills significantly. And the story, the legend became that he sold his soul to the devil, right? He made a pact with the devil for talent, and he went to hell for all time, but he was great while he was on earth. So sort of building on that myth, I thought about my own desire for talent at any cost. Turn, hellhound, turn. That's from Macbeth, not from Robert Johnson. And there's a little bit of Macbeth in here. I love Lady Macbeth. I don't think Shakespeare loved Lady Macbeth. I think he punishes her. But I think my sense of her is like, what else? I identify with her because I was like in her position, like what else could you do, right? Like she tried to work the angles that she could. Turn, hellhound, turn. First hearing the story of it, Robert Johnson's midnight crossroads hoodoo deal with the devil, no way I would have mortgaged my soul to burn my blues redder and hotter than any since or before. I was a boy back then who cared about my rep, and my rep hinged on acting good, no matter, like adults said, who was around. Consorting with him of horns and pitchfork wouldn't have been good, size of the prize be damned. Now I side with the queen gone wandering crazy. Hell is murky. Sure, most times there's no silt in the river. I've done good that I knew was good, and bad knowing it was bad. But then I've done bad trying to do good, and strangest of all, good when I set out to do bad. Now I can't see a way to salvation from this cross-stitch of lonely, dust-licked country junctions but the devil. That old goat doles out more mercy in an hour than God since he first flicked on the lights. Now I'd shake on that bargain in the beat of a blue bottle's wings, would trade my soul and my good name and my rep for talent without sending the fine print to my lawyer or hemming and hawing over the non-refundable nature of the ticket. and I'd settle on that sulfurous offer with no illusion that talent is happiness. Knowing I'd be trading that maze of good and bad for a labyrinth of jealous husbands with every chamber of their 38s loaded up, of women I two-timed, bubbling and troubling strychnine into my whiskey glass, of hot grits blistering my back, of razor blades under the tongues of my rivals, of friends easily bought but gone when trouble calls, of starless nights of self-doubt ending in the scalding light of hangover, of a lifetime of cash-stuffed envelopes not saving children from the sting of my absence. I know this, and still I'd cut my palm and sign that cloven-footed pact in blood. If up is down and left is right, and I can't be good the way my boy self wanted, why be common and untalented too? Why not trade this street of unlocked doors and rhododendron, this refrigerator humming to save my abundance unspoiled, this family like a Christmas card's gloss of family? Why not trade all this to have the myth of me handed down, father to son, father to son? Since I can't be good in this world, why not ink my autograph to the devil's dotted line and be great?
Jennifer has arrived.
Yes! I was telling them about the ills of the Merritt Parkway, but they know it well because they live in this fun state. This next poem was actually written as part of a public installation. I taught at Rye Country Day School down in Westchester County before I was at Manhattanville. And the folks in the town of Rye were putting together a poetry path at Rye Town Park and at the Edith Reed Wildlife Sanctuary, which is right behind Playland, the amusement park. And I went into it just wanting to curate and choose other folks' poems, but the more I saw how these spaces were being used, I became really interested in like the possibilities of poetry as a public art. And I almost rarely write like occasional poems. Like my friends are always asking me to write poems for their wedding. I was like, you don't want my poem at your wedding. As evidenced by the first two poems I wrote. So there's a little bit of a departure for me. And I appreciate that function that poetry can play, right? I think maybe we'll talk about this later. I think there's like some sort of secular spirituality that comes from poetry that can give folks something sustaining. On a different day. On a different day, I'd see the cormorants resting on these moldering pilings as sign of the once and future ruin surrounding me always. On this day, I take joy in the ebb and flow that I both know and cannot know. Cormorants perch where earlier a woman wanting to know the rhythm of tidal water launched her rowboat into my nursing lake. No death to all this, just some life become other life. Sorry, I skipped the stanza. My nursing lake. On some future day, perhaps this water will crest over the trail and no one will stand where I stand now. No death to all this, just some life become other life. On this day, the sodden wood of a ruined dock wastes more away, and a quartet of cormorants scans the reeds in the nearby salt marsh. And the saline air calms my lungs, and behind me, the high tide sound lambasting the rock-strewn shore of the point seems an abstract rumble. And for today, I want no more purpose than this. In some America, a gun. The pin oak leaves turned maroon, then dried brown, and in late autumn they fell. All winter I waited for their green return, into early spring. They are green now, outside the window on the classroom's south wall, greener for the day's clear blue scrim of sky. Through the east wall's window, open to mid-spring heat, I can hear the younger children screeching on the playing field up the hill. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, in some America, a gun in a child's hand has killed, is killing, will kill other children. Yesterday, the killed children were the age of my youngest child. Today, they are the age of my oldest. How old will they be tomorrow? I imagine their eyes, late autumn, winter, early spring, dilated with fear, or narrow with no capacity to understand. The killer's mind, a hailstorm of anger and confusion. I cannot imagine it. I am sitting in a classroom. The pin oak outside the window has come back to green. The gun in the child's hand killed teachers too. This, a teacher's job, yesterday, today, tomorrow, in some America, to die wrapped in our children. Late autumn, winter, early spring, teachers dead among our children. In some America, the killer, the gun, in the doorway to her classroom, a teacher, below windows hung with their wild art, under their small desks, children. How old will they be tomorrow? I think one of the difficulties of poetry for me and then presenting it to other people is that I come to poetry to work out sort of the darkest part of me, or the darkest part of my mind. My anxieties, my fears, my sense that something's unfair. But I think that creates a narrowness. I think folks who know me, I just read for a bunch of my neighbors at a launch party, and they were like, wait, you are different. Poet Iain is different from walking through the neighborhood, hanging out in backyards. And so I did, increasingly I want to bring some of that joyful side to me, and maybe more of my full self to my poems. It doesn't happen very often. Naomi says like 1 out of every 20 poems is happy.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not a bad ratio for me. You know, it went from 0 out of 100 to 1 out of 20, so I'm getting somewhere. So I wanted to end with, and I end the book with a couple of the poems that I think are more joyful. I mean, there is for me, there's always a balance between what is difficult and what is joyful. And the first one is it expresses my idea that all graduations should be joyful and rowdy and out of control. Like when someone's student walks across the stage, I think there should be a lot of rowdiness, a lot of volume. It's not true at all graduations. Frequency and amplitude, the child sing. I have known this volume in my life. I am fluent in it. They heard the man when he instructed the crowd to please hold your applause until all graduates have crossed the stage. They, mothers, sisters, aunties, cousins, ignored him, willfully. Their child, on top of the usual high school bullshit, homework and hormones, dealt every day with barbed wire eyes, policing their every movement through the hallways. Should the child be here? Is the child smart enough? If smart enough, quiet and disciplined enough, humble and low enough, look you in the eye and say hello enough. Every day, the child dodged rubber erasers aimed at her silhouette. Every day, the mockery of skin, of lips and nose, of the body's contours where it rounds the hips. And a history of hair stories. Box braids or locks every day, pulled on as if the lead chain to a coffle. Bow your head and walk this way. Their child. They heard please hold and were loud nevertheless. Erupted, rattled the rafters, shook the white man portraits lining the wall into the auditorium. They did what all of us should do. Send up every day praise for the child. Sing the child's survival every day. Every day, act a fool until the child is all grin and teeth and shaking a head in mock embarrassment that is an acknowledgement of love. An acknowledgement that whatever broken glass is set into the next wall to be scaled, when the child's name is called, there will always and every day be a loudness from the back. Joy and bulwark against ruin. Joy and bulwark against rack. So I wrote a poem and gave it a title, but I cannot pronounce the title because the title is in French and I do not speak French. And some people in the audience I know speak French. So I will not do them the disservice of like trying to pronounce it. Because when I've been coached up on French to, for readings, and I just, maybe if you're Gen X or older, you will know Pepe Le Pew, the Warner Brothers character who's like this skunk who's in love with a cat. He's a French skunk who's in love with a cat, right? But his French accent is like very stereotypical, and that's what I sound like when I try to do this. So I'm just gonna have a bad American accent. It's a poem about dance, and I think that French is the language of dance. I was actually listening to a jazz album on the way up here, and that jazz artist, Andrew Hill, had a French title that was about dance, so I'm feeling very justified in my title today. What I'm trying to say is dance of spring and quarantine. Dans printemps et quarantine. Near the end of my run, before the road turns steeply uphill toward the house, I see a girl alone on her front lawn. The day is beautiful, cloudless and cerulean, the latest in a string of beautiful days. The girl has wound her long black hair into a tight bun and wears brown plastic frame glasses not unlike my own, and dances. If she is dancing to music, I can't hear it. But then I don't listen too intently. I want her to be dancing to music only she can hear. I imagine the virus has kept her out of a studio for months. I imagine she has danced only in her basement or to the blue glare of a computer screen, disconnected from the other dancers. Besides plie, I do not have the language of dance to describe the few moves she performs while I run past. In the last one I catch, a cubist discombobulation of limbs, she arches her back until her hands touch the ground, then throws each leg separately over her head in a movement that would, if I attempted it, break into pieces my embrittled body. Whatever I become from here, I always want to be this girl. Dancing, I suppose, yes, dancing while people are dying, not out of callow or callous indifference, but in celebration of the dead. Celebration expressed as survival. Survival expressed as a claimant act of love, an act not native only to me, but practiced until it resides in me, muscle and sinew. An imperfect act that is the only one I can think to do. Dancing. Dancing until the imagined company of dancers spins and bends around me, until the music others cannot hear renders itself visible in my body. Dancing until each passerby believes again in cloudless and cerulean, again in this day and the possibility of the next. Thank you.
Lovely people in the back, there are plenty of seats. Please.
Up front, there are
join
seats
us.
up front.
Yes, please. And in the middle.
All yours.
Hi everyone, can you hear me with the mic? Is that good? Okay. Sorry to be late and that you had to hear me last on Iain's book tour when I was supposed to go first. I'm gonna, since a lot of you I don't know, I'm gonna read a poem from each of my books. I have 3 books and then one is hopefully going to come out soon. It's called A Fire in Her Brain, Epistolary Poems to Lucia Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and Sylvia Plath. But I'll start from the beginning. This is my first book, Looming, and I'll read one poem from this. It has a title from Beckett. I would like my love to die. I would like my love to die or at least that I did not love you so much. If I could turn my heart to winter, I would not need to do this to the earth. If you did not smile in your sleep or plaster your palm to my face with tenderness, I could leave and shut the trapdoor of my hostile-lined heart without looking back. I would like my love to die, so I would not have to murder everything around me, so I would not have to be the hunter I have become. But you are not going to release me from your unnatural embrace. You pin me beside you with your thin arm around my neck. It does not look strong enough to hold a small animal, but it is. Oh, this is my second book. It's called No Small Gift, and I'll read this poem from that. It's called The Philosopher Did Not Say. What secret had Nietzsche discovered when he walked the Turin streets before he flung his arms around a horse being beaten and collapsed into a decade-long coma? Clinging to the cowering brown beast, he said, "Mother, I am stupid." Wild hair and a three-piece tweed suit constrained the body that held the mind that knew too much. Why am I mining dead men for answers when they were all as mad as I am? The horse, his eyes hollow as those of the Burmese elephant that Orwell shot decades later, had the look of every betrayed creature. Perhaps Nietzsche saw the shock in the animal's eyes, how every human contains the capacity to inflict cruelty, the look that turns to recognition, to resignation, to an eye reflecting a field full of fallen horses. I'll read a poem from If Some God Shakes Your House. This book is a contemporary Antigone, and she is living through the first Trump administration, and instead of sacrificing her life for the sake of burying her brother, she's sacrificing herself for her disabled child. So this is the last poem in the book. As Antigone, I still want to believe I can find some way to fix you. That if I go back to the beginning, retrace the disaster with the savant detective's obsession, I can uncover a cure, the smartest expert, some successful drug. Better yet, I want the pediatrician to give you a different diagnosis. I want to go back to the walk home, past restaurants and playgrounds, a tunnel light catching all the auburn in your hair. I want to go back to the moment your father left us outside the cafe. Consider handing you to him, all 47 pounds of you in your gingham pants and hot pink cardigan, Dalmatians decorating the little pockets, and walk away without looking back. But I would never have left, and I won't now. One way or another, you will be the end of me. Inadvertent brute force, vector of virus, constant caretaking, your heavy body forcing my remission's abrupt end. I know what's waiting, as certain as cloth hung to hold my scarred neck. I will not walk away. The moment the nurse pressed your splotched body into my arms, your needs fixed my fate. Constantly confused, your jagged voice requests Christmas songs all spring. You shove words of grace into my dry throat, and I sing. I don't need a bottle of pills, white as sleep, to silence me. every ersatz saint knows endless sacrifice is suicide. For 20 years I have been disappearing. Touch me, I am not even here. And I'm going to read two poems from my new manuscript and close with that. The first one's really short. It was in Poem a Day. Diane Seuss picked it for Poem a Day, and then it was nominated and won a Pushcart Prize. So it's called Preparing for Residential Placement for My Disabled Daughter. But I'm going to be preparing for a long time because of the Medicaid cuts. She lost her spot at her place that she had been accepted to. So pray for us. Preparing for residential placement for my disabled daughter. My life without you, I have already seen it. Today on the salt marsh, the red-winged blackbird perched in the tallest tree, sage green branches falling over the water. She sat there for a long time doing nothing. As she lifted up to fly, the slender branch shook from the release of her weight. When the bird departed, it seemed the branch would shake forever in the wind, bobbing up and down. When it finally stopped moving, the branch was diminished, reaching out to the vast sky. And the last poem I'm going to read tonight, thank you so much, Iain, for having me read with you, and Laurel for inviting us to read here. Thank you all for being here. This is a poem after Mitre Bang. She's a wonderful poet from California. Her books are published by Grey Wolf. She has 3 books out. And in her most recent book, she writes about an animal that is extinct called the saola. And this is after that poem. It's called Ineluctable Modality of the Visible. Let's assume you do not know about Lucia Joyce. Let's assume you read one of her father's early books in school. Perhaps you love the last paragraph of The Dead, or Once Identified with Stephen Douglas. Let's assume you have not seen Lucia's photograph, that you do not know about her extraordinary talent as a dancer in Paris, or that she was diagnosed with schizophrenia in the 1930s by Jung and transferred to a Northampton hospital after her father died. That she languished there for 31 years without one visit from her mother, where she wrote all her letters and the novel that her nephew destroyed after her death. Let's assume you don't know that she was often restrained. Let's assume you don't know that people with autism are now kept at this hospital, that 2 documentaries have been made, including an expose about people with learning disabilities who were restrained and sedated there, that 4 patients died between October 2010 and May 2011. Let's assume you don't know that in 2018, the father of a girl with autism sued the hospital because his daughter was kept in a 12-by-10 room with only a mattress and chair fed through a hole in a metal door. Let's assume you do not know anyone like Anna Olivia, part of the 25% of those on the spectrum who cannot speak, read, bathe themselves. You may not know she needs her hand held to keep her from walking into traffic when she is outside. That she spends every unsupervised moment flapping her arms, jumping, babbling, engaging in, quote, non-contextual laughter, mumbling lyrics from Sesame Street songs, scratching herself, eating paper. Let's assume you care. Let's assume you understand what's at stake. Let's assume you understand my love for Lucia is my love for Anna Olivia, and for the part of me that was also thwarted, that my love for Anna is inextricable from my grief for Anna, that my love for Lucia is my love for every woman who is thwarted. Let's assume you understand the world is a dangerous place for women, that the world is dangerous for anyone different, that you understand women are still locked up in small rooms and restrained. You understand women you love have been harmed, your sister, your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, maybe your best friend, your daughter. You understand we are all unsafe. You understand that things must change. You understand that things don't change. You understand. Thank you.
Whew, I need a moment to breathe, right? Those are really powerful readings, both of you. Thank you so much. Your collections both feel a bit like they are about disaster. Jennifer, if Some God Shakes Your House is the one that I was reading to prepare for this, and you were writing about COVID-19 and the loss of abortion rights, cancer, death, your daughter's challenges. And Iain, you're writing poems about the erasures that racism causes. So how do we write about our disaster without losing hope or joy? Or should we? Everybody can start.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think about Emily Dickinson, and hope is the thing with feathers that lingers in the soul. I wear a necklace every day that says hope. I mean, I want to be able to write more hopeful poems. Like Iain was talking about earlier, 1 in 20 now, he said, are hopeful. I find it hard to write hopeful poems that feel truly authentic and that aren't sentimental. But I think it is important, and when you can write one that turns out good, like that dancing poem and that graduation poem that Iain had, I think it's important to share those and to get those out in the world. But I think a little bit like what Iain was saying earlier, I write poetry to deal with the hardest things and the things that I don't understand, so I'm still grappling with. So I try to work them out in the poem. But I am at heart a hopeful person. And I do hope that people will get through this very, very hard moment. And I think my new book has few more hopeful poems in it.
I mean, I think for me, hope can only exist if we're honest about the situation of the world, right? Like, if we're not being honest about that hopefulness just might be obliviousness, right? So I think the poems about that which is difficult and the poems about that which is joyful or hopeful have to coexist. Yeah, and deep down, I do want to bring more of that more hopeful, joyful self to the poems, because I think it, again, as I said, I think it creates a narrowness of my experience when I don't bring all of that in. So I'm wanting to bring more of it in. But you know, just because I'm in a mode where I'm doing several events I've done several events over the last few weeks, I should say that like some of the art of poetry is the performance of poetry and interacting with an audience and with a community, and getting to do things like this has made me much more hopeful about the situation. That people are still coming to poetry readings, people are still engaging with art and literature, are kind of getting beyond the sort of disaster that I think is the sense of disaster that pervades our national discourse from all sides, and people are still showing up for one another and having conversations with each other, and being human and vulnerable and real with each other. And I think that's where some of, like, no matter what the subject matter of the poem is, that's where some of the hope comes in for me, is that poems exist on the page, but they also exist in performance. And I think the performance of poetry gives me hope.
You suggested in your introduction to one of the poems that poetry was a kind of, or created a kind of secular spirituality. Am I remembering that correctly? And that can sustain us. So, such a great opening. I'm going to let you talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have like a strong religious practice. I think because my mother was a classics professor and I grew up with both the myths of the Romans and the Greeks, but also myths that she wanted me to understand that are stem from African American culture and West African culture that was brought with that population. I think I got to church on Sunday and I was like, how is this God different than these gods, right? And so I just never quite jived with me. And so I think I've had to find my own spiritual practice. And I think at the center of that has been language and storytelling. And I think language and storytelling are so essential to the human experience. It's the thing that binds us together. Like every culture has a storytelling practice, right? It's how we disseminate information. It's how we disseminate values. It's how we entertain ourselves. It's how we bind one another. Bind ourselves to one another. And so I think poetry in its storytelling function, but also its ability to isolate emotion and heighten emotion, can put us in reflective states that to me are helpful for my growth and my well-being, and that provide what I remember as a child of what religion provided for me. But there's no like orthodoxy or dogma to it, right? I mean, what I love about American poetry right now is that there's so many different types of poems being written. There's so many different people writing. Poetry is taking everyone who comes, and I think that's a really beautiful thing, and I think it's why poems are so strong right now. And I think that's testament to its spiritual capacity.
I've always loved the C.S. Lewis quote that says, "We need to know we're not alone." And what's giving me hope right now is the undergraduates I'm teaching this semester, they love poetry. And it was so surprising to me. We started yesterday in class. And they love everything from Jericho Brown to Lucille Clifton to Philip Larkin, like all the poems we read. And they were really into reading them out loud and talking about them. So I think that's giving me hope. And in terms of spirituality, I didn't really grow up with a strong religious background. My parents grew up in the Catholic Church and didn't want to really strongly impose that on us, although they did enough in ways that mattered a lot, in bad ways that mattered a lot. But that being said, I think reading has always been, my religion, and is what sustains me and what has sustained me through the darkest times of my life. And like Iain was saying, seeing all of you still going to readings, that's a hopeful thing. It is a spiritual act to kind of see people being really moved, either at weddings or at funerals, hearing poems, just at poetry readings in class. So I think it's really moving.
Great. Thank you. Iain, you write, and I wonder now if any of us can outrun the landscape of our upbringing. I like that line. You're speaking in that particular poem of a literal landscape, but there are also spiritual and intellectual and emotional landscapes that we carry around with us, in your poetry too, for sure. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
You can start.
So in that poem that Laurel referenced is a poem about really not liking the town in upstate New York where I finished growing up and wanting to run away from it, and sort of my teenage self promising that I would never return. But then as an adult, like my parents still live there. I go 2 or 3 times a year. I bring my kids up there, and in that way I find the physical landscape inescapable, but also the cultural and social landscape of the town inescapable, and it has sort of filtered into me in ways that I'm still learning about and still trying to recognize. Strangely, that line is my father-in-law. He underlined one line in his copy of the book, and that's the line. Yeah. And I think that's just, as an educator, I just really see that the ideas that children experience when they're young, you just can't get away from them, right? I think you're fighting against them in so many ways. I think it's why I wrote less about childhood in this book. I mostly wrote about my own children's childhood, but I keep coming back to that subject. I think it's why I taught middle and high school for so long, is to try and figure out, like what stays with us, and like how we become defined positively or negatively by that, how we either push back against it or accept it and move forward. So I think we always contend with those formative years and those formative experiences, and for my part, like I think a lot of my life has played out because of those experiences, has played out as it has because of those experiences.
You're nicer than I am, because you go back and spend a lot of time in that place you wanted to escape. But I left when I was 17, like the Larry Levis poem said, and I tried to not go back. My parents still live there as well, in the town that I grew up in. It was a miserable, childhood for me. But, in the context of a privileged childhood, let's say that. But I don't like going back there. I don't really enjoy it. The whole state of New Jersey, I would rather not enter if it were up to me. But yeah, I guess I have to write a lot about things that happened in the past, but not so much childhood. Like I don't really write about my childhood when I lived there. I kind of just, maybe I haven't fully processed it, but I write about the moments where, inextricably, I can't go back from my daughter's illness and not getting an abortion when I was really sick, when I was pregnant with her, things like that kind of can't be changed. But yeah, you're nicer than I am.
This kind of ties to the question about secularity, because I went to Catholic church until I was 16 years old, and I think the times I've been back in Catholic church, I see where it influenced my poetic practice. There's something beautiful just linguistically about that mass, right? And about so many of the prayers. And I think also I need that hour alone in thought and contemplation once a week is still something I need. It doesn't take the form that the Catholic Church wants, but it's something that I think is inculcated in me. Or maybe it's something that all humans need, and the church has tried to harness in a certain way. So I think in like ways we don't really realize as we're children, like these things are happening to us, we're being influenced, and then they play out in our lives moving forward in ways that, again, can be positive or that we sort of push back against.
One good thing that the Catholic Church did for my poetic practice is that my uncle and my mom both went to Catholic school, and there was a lot of poetry in the 60s in Catholic school. And so they exposed me to a lot of poetry when I was very little. So that's where my love of poetry started.
Yeah. That's great. Jennifer, I was interested in your collection that while it expresses a very deep love for your daughter, that last poem that you read to us tonight is also rawly honest about how caring for her feels like it's killing you. And as well, you talk a lot about the injustices around abortion, not being allowed an abortion, being talked out of an abortion. I think we need more honest discussions around mothering and these kinds of things. I'm interested if you considered the ramifications of telling your story in this political environment.
That's a good question. I'm not so worried about the ramifications of telling the story in this political environment because I don't think MAGA is reading poetry. So I'm not scared of that. But the ramifications of being really honest and telling the story in my last book, If Some God Shakes Your House, had deep personal ramifications for me within my family. My mom didn't talk to me for a year. She still pretends that book didn't exist before it came out. I talked to her about it, and she told me that it would be a huge disservice to Anna to put things like this out in the world, that I wanted to get an abortion because it means I don't love her. And I said, my feeling is that it means that I love her more, that I didn't, want her to be born in this situation, and that I've spent the last, 25 plus when I was pregnant, almost 26 years taking care of her, and really devoting my life to her when giving up a lot of opportunities that I could have had. So I don't really agree with the silencing of women, especially about bad things that have happened. And I feel like that was, the narrative of so much of my life, from my childhood through my first marriage, which I was married to Anna's biological father for 20 years. So there was a lot of silencing there. I mean, when we first got her diagnosis, he didn't want anyone to know. He was very ashamed of it and wanted it to be a secret, and thought maybe we can fix her before anyone finds out. So he didn't tell his family, he didn't tell my family. So I guess I had a really great Jungian therapist for 3 years, and he said, you have to just stand up for yourself in every area of life. And that included, for me, poetry. So this book was the most honest book that I wrote, and I think it's important to, especially for women, for us to talk about the nuances of all the experiences, like Keats's negative capability, that you can hold these two things, great love, and also great grief and trauma at the same time. And hopefully that helps other people, not only to tell their stories, but more importantly, to live their lives that are hard.
I'm going to open it up to the audience. You can just hold on to that.
Hold on
Pass
to
it back
that.
between the two
Okay.
of you. For questions, what would you like to ask of these two writers? Yes, in the back.
Does your husband's negativity is the reason why you wrote your first poem, the one that you mentioned about love to God?
Oh, no, that one is, people sometimes think that, but that poem is not about him. It's about wanting not to love my daughter as much as I love my daughter. So it's not about a romantic relationship. it's about wishing that I didn't love my daughter as much as I do, because he abandoned her, but I can't abandon her. I want to take care of her still. So it's sometimes wishing that I didn't love her as much as I do. Yeah.
Other questions?
I have.
No, I won't fill the void. No, Iain talks about myth, and the myths that culturally, religiously, historically we are saddled with, and your poetry is, if I've read of it, it takes on those myths, steps into some of them, plays with them. My question really is, to what extent is the actual writing of poetry, at least your poetry, an act of itself creating myth, creating your own mythology, and not with myth meaning anything of a lie,
Yeah.
as you point out, a common construction of values and.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that you asked an astute question. I think that is I think that's central to poetry, especially poetry that uses the lyric I, right? That uses the first person, right? I think, and that's some of the reason why I want more of my joyful self to be in my poems, is because invariably you can only get so much of yourself on the page, right? Invariably you can only have a fraction of your full self there, and in doing so, I think you make a myth of yourself, right? You create a character or a version of yourself for the page that you're then presenting to the audience, and I feel strongly that what I write is fiction, right? It's based on my life, and I'm writing out of my life, but for the good of the art, I have changed details or enhanced images or embellished experiences in order to make, in service of narrative or in service of image. And so again, I think that's creation, right? And I think that's creating a myth in some point, in some part. And I try to deal with that, especially in some of the more political poems. I always try to situate myself or the speaker of the poems as somewhat complicit in the system, in the political system, which is, I think, some of the difficulty of the moment we live in. Like in so many instances, there are things that I do that are actually harmful to me, right? Like paying taxes. Like which is to say, like, where do my tax dollars go? What are they going to? And are they going to things that actually hurt me? And also, I think there are times when I don't live up to my ideals and my political ideals or my moral ideals, right? And to not recognize that on the page would be false. But I think there's a creation of self in a poem. There's a creation of a speaker in a poem that is very akin to myth making.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm very overtly aware of when I'm writing. All three of my books have used Greek myth. For the first one, it was Penelope, and then Demeter, Persephone, and for the second one, it was Philomela, and then the third one is, the third of the poems are Antigone. But I think, even the poems that use the lyric I, that are, supposed to be in the present about myself, my own life, it's sort of like trying to unify all of those parts of myself and make a story of it that makes sense, to me and hopefully to the readers. Joan Didion writes, we write in order, we tell stories in order to live, and I think that has been important to me to think about that. Diane Seuss talks about this very question that you asked about, what is the poet's job in terms of mythologizing their own life? Like, how do they approach it? And that it's a kind of a weighty consideration, to in how you approach it. So I think you have to be very like conscious of it while you're doing it.
Melissa?
Earlier today, Jennifer, you said something about sentimentality. And earlier today in my life, I was in the poetry business. We were reading a poem that was a perfectly good poem, except for a very sentimental line. And I just feel confused about sentimentality. So, is there a sentimentality litmus poets where you know, like some poems break every rule
Right.
and they're fabulous.
Yes.
And they're sentimental. Other poems have no sentimentality. They're very full, very compressed. And I kind of think they're not that interesting.
Yeah.
They're not messy.
Right.
So what kind of litmus tests do you use to be like,
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I have a few words like that I really don't allow my students to use, like, you know, rainbow and unicorn. No, I'm kidding, but, a little bit.
Luminous. Luminous is on my list.
I like that one, no, that's a Lucy word. But no, I think the best poems are the poems that like are really full of sentiment and they walk that tightrope and they don't veer off into sentimentality, or they do just a tiny bit and then they pull themselves back. So those are the ones I love. Like when Iain was reading his poem about the dancing, I was thinking about the Jack Gilbert poem Brief for the Defense, and he's a poet who does that. Like he really flirts with sentimentality, but in my opinion, he doesn't like go overboard, you know, with it. I don't know. I think everybody has their own definition, you know, of what's too sentimental and what's just the right amount of sentiment. But it is hard, and you're right. You hear that all the time in poetry classes, and you know, some people thought that the Larkin poem that ended, "We must be kind to each other, we must be careful of each other, we must be kind while there's still time." A couple people thought that was too sentimental and that Larkin should have taken out that whole last line and a half. And I mean, that's the heart of the poem for me. So everyone's gonna have a different opinion on that, I think.
I do think there's a relationship between sentimentality and cliche, right? And I think that's one litmus test that you can use, is like, if you're expressing a deep emotion in ways that other people have expressed it, or with language that is overused or too familiar, I think then for me, the sentimentality tips over the bounds of what I would think is allowable. But I mean, as maybe you saw, like I privilege the heart over the head when I'm writing, and so I think I'm always risking sentimentality. But I think you can get away with it through indirection, right? By starting in one direction and then like kind of weaving around to the emotion that you're trying to express. I think you can allow concrete objects to take on the sentiment that your speaker would otherwise be expressing, right? And allow, because I think some of the issue with sentimentality is it can foreclose the reader's interpretation of the poem. And that takes something away from the reader. And I think the reader is important to the creative act. Like the reader finishes the poem for me. And when you're too sentimental and you over-determine the emotion, you remove that from the reader. So by putting that sentiment into objects that the reader then has to decode and interpret, I think you can allow yourself to have that deep feeling without taking away the reader's creativity and ability to play and understand the poem. But I do like it in poems when the speaker just like steps to the front of the stage and says what they mean, right? I think accessibility can be a bad word in poetry circles, and I don't think it should be, right? I think poems should be, they can be hard and rigorous, but ultimately they should be comprehensible, right? And the emotion should be comprehensible. if someone is willing to put in time to read them and read them, you know, thoughtfully and maybe have to do a little research.
All right, so the library has to close in 15 minutes. So, and these two wonderful poets have brought books with them because poets need to eat, right? So please buy their books, and if you're feeling extra generous, I have a book coming out too. So, and pre-sales mean a lot, so if you want a card from me, come get that too, but prioritize them, please, because they came tonight, and if you would please give them a round of applause.